different definitions. Here we go. Depending on the author or depending on the researcher that you're reading, you'll get different definitions of what enmeshment is. So I'm going to start by just defining when at Overcoming Enmeshment, we talk about it, what we mean by that. Enmeshment describes a quality of a relationship where differentiation and separation. So differentiation means there's a recognition that we're two different people. We feel differently, we believe differently, we have different needs. And separateness, which is the ability to pursue those different needs independently. You being separate from me in a differentiated, separated relationship is not a threat to me. I'm not reading that as, okay, now you're against me. It's a recognition that you're your own person, you've got to do your own thing. And on occasion, we'll come together and that'll feel good, we'll like that. But in enmeshed relationships, differentiation and separateness are not tolerated very well, to say the least. Specifically with enmeshed men, which we do a lot of work with, we do a lot of work with enmeshed women. Usually that differentiation and separation is met with control, guilt, obligation. And this happens, it starts from childhood onward. I've even worked with some enmeshed men where it appears that the guilt and obligation even started before birth. I worked with a couple of men where the family story is, when we found out you were coming, we knew that you were going to, make peace in our family. You're going to be such a blessing to your mother. You're going to make everything better. So in some of these enmeshed relationships for men and women, they're coming into a family even before they've drawn their first breath. They're coming into a family that has high expectation and high need from them. And that, to say the least, causes a lot of problems down the road. Key to the enmeshment dynamic, or a big part of the enmeshment dynamic that at Overcoming Enmeshment we're really interested in helping people with, is that whole guilt and obligation message. All of us come from families here. All of us have mothers here, and we all love our families and mothers. It's not about whether you love them or not. It's about whether the North Star in that relationship is really love and relationship, or whether it's guilt and obligation. Guilt and obligation will always yield a toxic result for everybody involved. In these enmeshed relationships, it can be very insular, it can be very closed in. Because again, remember, separateness is not, it's not something that's tolerated well or celebrated, it's a threat. And so these enmeshed relationships can become really insular, kind of pulled off from the larger picture. And I haven't found a more delicate way to put this clinically, but relationships that are isolated, relationships that are insular, they get weird. There's that you're my everything, I'm your everything kind of a thing that can really detach from some reality. And that's where these enmeshed adults that we work with, men or women, that's where they can really struggle with awareness of why this is a problem for their partner, or why this is a problem in the larger picture. Because in some ways, initially, that really intense, dyad, that really intense relationship with a mother, a father, a caregiver, it can feel good. It can feel validating. This big person relies on me for so much. There is a piece of normal development where having an intense dyad, an intense pair relationship with a parent is really good for development. Little boys and little girls fall in love with their parents. It's developmentally normal, developmentally appropriate for these kids to say, I want to marry mom, or, I want to marry dad. As time goes on and the child recognizes there's people outside of their family, and importantly, if they recognize that parents have a strong bond with each other, they get the message that the bond with my parent is not for me. I don't belong here. I have to find my own place in the world. And when the parents support that, that takes us down a track of really good, really healthy development. And in a lot of enmeshed adults that I work with, there was a disruption in their parent system. And this is a really natural tendency when, as an adult, you don't have your partner, you don't have the person that you need to rely on emotionally. You turn to whatever is easiest. This is a human tendency. We'll do what's easy, what's convenient at the cost of doing what's best. So it's fairly natural for a parent to turn to a child for emotional support. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good for either one of you. So we see that in enmeshed adults is usually there's some kind of rupture in the parents' relationship early on, and the child started playing the role, or the child got invited into the role of emotional support, surrogate partner. We can see this in a lot of different places. I'm not one to judge anybody's parenting choices, but I always laugh at the sign in the movie theater where I live that says, "Please don't bring children to R-rated movies past 5 p.m." My thought is, my small children, I don't bring them to an R-rated movie because it's full of content and full of things that kids aren't ready for. There's not anything magical that before 5 p.m. they're fine, and after 5 p.m. it's a problem. Same thing with adult problems and adult emotions. When a kid gets loaded with that too fast, too young, it can really mess some things up inside for the kid. A lot of these enmeshed folks that we work with, in the beginning, they can wear it as a badge of honor that they've been mature for a long time. They've been adults for a long time. Many of the enmeshed folks that I work with are objectively very competent people, but it came at a high cost. They became competent, they became skilled because they had to. Mom relied on it, or dad relied on it. It wasn't a choice. And so often we'll see in these enmeshed folks, they find themselves angry, living in a life that was built around them rather than a life that they chose. That's where we get into some of the relationship problems when there's enmeshment, and I'll come back to that in a minute. With this, intense parental bond that doesn't let go at the appropriate time, or doesn't allow the child to emancipate at the appropriate time, there is no room left for a romantic partner. And I'll even go on to say that there may not be room to pursue a dream or a vocation or a calling. Many of the enmeshed folks that I work with, they struggle professionally because they are doing the job that mom or dad or family expected from them, or they're doing it the way that mom or dad or family expected from them. Not in the way that they're called or interested. And again, you can only do that for so long before it breaks down. Resentment tends to be a big theme we see with enmeshed folks, and a lot of that is unrealized, ungrieved grief that comes from, I lived the life that was handed me. I lived the life that made mom happiest or dad happiest, rather than becoming my own person. In these enmeshed families, there's a fear that if you become your own person, you won't have room for me anymore. Again, separateness is not tolerated. So one place that adults will go, or one way that the enmeshment will manifest in adulthood, is ambivalence. I don't commit to anything. I'm keeping all of my options wide open, which in the short term seems like a really good compromise. But in the long term, it's just as much of a problem to commit to the wrong thing as it is to not commit to anything. And this is where I get calls and emails from partners of enmeshed men who will say, I don't even know if he wants to be with me. I don't even know if he likes me. I feel like I'm always second to his family. That ambivalence is a big problem in the relationships, and it comes from the enmeshed person not being able to step out on their own, make a declaration about who they are and what they want, and even if it's a disaster, even if it's a mistake, to claim it as, well, this is my disaster, my mistake. That's what I get to do as an adult. I get to call the shots in my own life, and I get to deal with the consequences of that. It's one of the ways that they preserve that staying small. In the case of enmeshed men, I'm still mom's good little boy. I'm still mom's special boy. I'm available to her. I'm open to her. that causes problems in committed relationships. There's a couple advice columnists around the country that Google has learned I get a kick out of reading their columns. So in my news feed, these advice columns will come up, and every couple of months there will be one about mother-son issues, enmeshment issues. And I always send these to Dr. Adams because I get a kick out of the advice that comes back. I'm thinking one recently, this woman wrote in and said, I love to see how caring my male partner can be towards his mom. He is sensitive, he's empathetic, but I'm a little worried about if our relationship goes further. I'm a little worried about how big of a presence she's going to be. It makes me feel like there may not be room for me. So this woman, without, she doesn't mention Dr. Adams, she doesn't mention any of the enmeshment books, without having the language for it, she's describing exactly what that enmeshed relationship is and the impact on the relationship. And without fail, the advice columnist writes back and says, "What's wrong with a boy who treats his mom well?" This is something that our culture is both very, very familiar with and not really seeing for what it is. There's nothing wrong with a boy who treats his mom well, as long as he can shift gears when it's time for him to have a new love interest, to have a new person in his life. For mom to be able to let go and realize that she's not the most important person in the world to him anymore. I've heard this referred to before as the what's the word for it? The last sacrifice of parenthood is realizing that your child doesn't need you like they did before, and that you don't have the most important place for them anymore, and to celebrate them going out into a larger world and following their own path. So one of the side effects of this ambivalence, this inability to move on into his or her, the enmeshed person's own life, is you'll see ambivalence on the outside, and there usually be a lot of anger on the inside. Again, you can only do somebody else's bidding for so long before you get tired of it, before you have a part of you that speaks up and says, when am I going to get mine? This is where we'll see, this isn't the case for every enmeshed individual, but a lot of enmeshed individuals, this is where we'll see addiction come in, secret lives come in, affairs come in. A part of his or her life that mom or dad or family doesn't get a say in, mom or dad doesn't even know about. A dark side, a secret side that's fueled by the anger, the guilt, and the obligation from the relationships on the outside. So the anger can also come up with how the enmeshed person is prone to show up ideally at the beginning of a relationship. I'll hear from a lot of the partners of enmeshed men. He was the ideal boyfriend, so sensitive, so empathetic, showed up for everything. I've heard from some enmeshed men, they'll say, the day I got married, I felt it change. I was no longer excited about this. I felt trapped by it. Because to the enmeshed person, commitment isn't a path to freedom and expression. It's shackling, it's limiting. And again, that comes from the early on experience in the family. There wasn't commitment out of this is what I want to do, and this is what I feel, and this is what I'll give to you. There was commitment and loyalty that was demanded. And so some of the anger can come from, in the beginning, enmeshed men who I work with primarily, they'll set the bar so high. They'll set the expectation really, really high. And then as they settle into a more regular pattern in life, their partner is essentially left, holding a bouquet of disappointment, saying, what happened? And neither of them realizing that in the beginning, that was a performance. And not necessarily in a manipulative or a conniving way, but a performance. And I thought this is what makes relationships work. I thought this is what would make you happy. rather than realizing that it's honesty, it's truth, it's separation and differentiation that actually allows people to be close and be passionate with each other. So another source of the anger that these enmeshed men particularly carry around is this sense of, I've constantly disappointed my partner, and they have a hard time recognizing that they played a role in that. You disappointed your partner because you treated her as fragile, or him as fragile. You treated your partner as a person that could be placated and managed, which is usually what these enmeshed guys have done for their mothers. They placated and they managed their mother's emotions. You treated them as something to be managed rather than a living, breathing human being who actually wants a relationship with you, a differentiated and separated you. So when it comes to, and there's hours we could say on this, and I'll just give a little blurb here for what healing from enmeshment looks like. A lot of people that I'll work with, when they initially contact me, they'll say, I haven't talked with my mother in years. We had a big blow up, or I set a big boundary. Why is this still coming up for me? Because the solution to enmeshment is not an external solution. It's an internal one. It's a reorientation. It's moving from guilt and obligation into passion and purpose and individual personhood. So Dr. Adams and I will talk about in the men's workshops, we're changing the compass point from guilt and obligation to real love. A lot of folks who are facing, enmeshment, one of the things that scares them about getting better is they think they're going to have to amputate relationships with loved ones. And I would bet everybody in the room can identify with loving someone where it's really complicated and it's painful sometimes. Emancipation and stopping the enmeshed relationship isn't about amputating relationships with people that you love. It's about preserving your ability to be you and to give when you feel like it, to give what you actually can give instead of being overwrought upon by whether it's actually, a parent who was insecure and was immature, or a partner who you project that onto. Again, in that early relationship dynamic, when he sets the bar high and his partner comes and says, what happened? He'll often turn around and say, see, you want too much from me. Again, neglecting to notice the part he played in that. I essentially, I shined up the old car and told you it ran really well, but it really doesn't. I didn't show you who I really was. I didn't show you what I'm really capable of. This change is really, really possible. And I think about it in terms of it's finishing the growing up process that our parents didn't help us complete. Again, that great and last sacrifice of parenthood. And I talk often about my kids. I have an 8-year-old boy, an 11-year-old boy, and a 5-month-old girl. And about a year ago, this started with my 11-year-old when, we'd have a Saturday free and I'd say, what do you want to do, buddy? And he would say, I really want to go with my friends. To his face, I would say, that's great. Who do we need to call? What do you want to set up? Where do I need to take you? No joke, privately behind closed doors with my wife, we've bawled about this. Do you remember when all he wanted to do was spend time with us? Do you remember when we were the greatest people in the world? He ought to be growing up into his own person, and it's exciting to see. And that's what healing from enmeshment is really about. It's about finishing that growing up process, becoming your own man or woman, and setting the terms for which you will love and interact with, terms that will actually work for you, terms that you can actually continue to give what you have and want to give indefinitely, instead of having it all taken out of you up front, feeling like you have to give it all up front and then have nothing to give later on. So I could go on, but I'm seeing some questions come up in the chat. Do we want to get to those now, Alex?
Let's start with our first question. So the first question is, the more insecure about myself in the marriage, the more they want to co-regulate and enmesh with their spouse. This is because of betrayal trauma that has caused terrible triggers and anxiety. So how can they kind of prevent that from happening?
Yeah. So in enmeshment, entanglement, lack of differentiation, it's a reality in all relationships. However, I think when it comes to a marriage, a secure, functioning, good marriage, I think there are some exceptions. That the more insecure I get, the more I want to co-regulate myself with my spouse. I don't think there's anything fundamentally pathological about that. In other words, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. You should want that from the person that you choose. The more unstable and scared I am, the more I want to be with you. I hope you picked someone that you would want to run to with problems. The problem becomes when that for one or both parties, when running to each other is not something that we continue to freely give to each other. It's something that we feel if we don't do this, bad things are going to happen. It's when we feel held hostage to it, where that becomes a problem. Our childhood trauma, of course, dogs us into our adult relationships. And I'm of the opinion that in order to have a good relationship, I don't think you have to heal all of your trauma and be a blank slate. I think you have to know what you're taking into, and you have to work out with your partner. How are we going to navigate this? Because when you attach yourself to another person in that kind of intimate, secure, functioning relationship, if you have a problem with this, I have a problem with this, because when you're not doing well, I can't do well. That's not necessarily codependency. It's codependency when that flows one way, but when it's back and forth, we watch each other's back, we help each other with this. I have one couple that I work with right now that one of the principles in their marriage is we heal the past in this relationship. They bring each other their hurts and insecurities all the time, and they really help each other with that. But that's the overt agreement that they made. They're both okay with that. They're actually both excited for that. They like to provide that for each other. In that, I hope that clarifies a little bit about, what could be going on there. And I would say in situations like that, it's really, really important. You talk to your partner, how do you feel when this happens? And why do you feel this way when it happens? Is there something better we could be doing for each other? And you work for doing better, not just feeling better. If you have a partner who's really sensitive to feeling overwhelmed and trapped, coming to them in, stark naked need and, really intense, that could be hard for them to meet you. And you guys might have to negotiate some ways that are a little easier for both of you to come together and help each other. But it's doable. Don't shy away from connecting and helping each other because you fear that, that's too close or that's unhealthy. It's only unhealthy if you're doing something that both of you haven't, willfully, consciously agreed to.
Okay, and then our next question. How, as a partner, how do you work with your spouse to communicate the boundaries to their parents?
This one's hard because when it comes to the enmeshed person breaking free and setting boundaries, it's not our boundary thing. It's a his boundary thing or her boundary thing. Because task number one in emancipating is to feel yourself, be your own person. That doesn't mean do whatever the heck you want. That means come from a place of what you want, what's good for you, and you're not going to give that up automatically just because a relationship wants something different for you. I can't count how many times I've heard from the spouse of an enmeshed person when he comes back from the workshop and he's got some sharp edges, some stuff they run into. I hear spouses say all the time, I'm finally in a relationship with someone who's not me. I felt like I was in an echo chamber before. So it's not a we communicate the boundaries initially. It's a he or she, whoever the enmeshed partner is, they communicate the boundaries initially. They have to come up with what makes sense to them and what feels good to them. You as the partner, if that's not going to work for you, you ought to lodge a complaint. You ought to say, I know this is really, really hard for you. I'm proud of the steps you're taking to set some boundaries. I need you to know that this arrangement of you'll only answer the phone every other time your mother calls, I still don't love that. That's not going to work very well for me. The partnership and what you guys develop together, it happens in a back and forth, but back and forth can only happen when there's two individuals who are differentiated and separated. It's a really, really hard part of the healing process. And, my heart goes out to you partners who have to wait through this. It's most of the work I do with couples when it comes to these deeper attachment wounds and these things to figure out, it feels worse before it feels better, because there is a lot of underpinning work. But I would say once your partner is really clear on their boundaries and they're maintaining those, then the two of you start talking about, do we have the best relationship arrangement for us? Is this working well for us? And what are we going to do about that?
I just muted you. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. It's all good.
Okay, and then our next question. Can you be enmeshed with a parent without having an intense relationship with them?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say the intensity of that relationship, it's not always apparent. I work with countless enmeshed people who will say oh, I don't know that I ever felt, the real guilt or the real obligation. Usually what that means is it wasn't overt. I can't think of what my parents said. It's usually enacted in some way. Like the teenager says to mom, hey, I'm going to go hang out with some friends. And she just frowns really big. Oh, I'm going to miss you. It may not be overt, but it can be there. There's also Dr. Adams recently, taught me about this. There's two sides to emancipating and letting go. There's the parent letting go, and then there's the child letting go of their special status, their special place in the family. Again, that if you want to call it a peacemaker role, that parentified child role, there's a lot of benefit that comes along with that. There's maturity, there's special status, and for these enmeshed folks that we work with, that's a real part of their grief, is letting go of that special status, leaving the role in the family that is no longer appropriate for them to play or no longer needed for them to play. So there definitely can be that guilt and family obligation. And I want to be really clear, when we talk about mother enmeshment, we're not in the business of villainizing mothers. We're not in the business of villainizing families. This isn't about, good people versus bad people. It's about relationship patterns that don't serve continual growth, continual health. And, I'll say in my experience as a marriage therapist, they're very easy to fall into. Our natural instincts for relationships stink. We actually have to learn how to do them well. They don't come to us naturally. So there can definitely be enmeshment without an overt awareness of the guilt and the obligation or the burden. And for this, question, I would say, spend some time thinking about what you feel guilt over and why. Where does that guilt come from? Was it ever reinforced? That guilt could be reinforced by, overt, hey, you owe this to me, or it could be reinforced by every time I came back and said, I thought about it and I'd really rather spend time with you, Mom, than with my friends. Oh, I knew you'd make the right choice. Or, there's reward or happiness. It can be reinforced in a lot of different ways. It doesn't always feel awful initially.
Okay. And we have a couple questions in here about the relationship with an enmeshed woman and their mom, and how that is different from the men enmeshed.
Aaron, if you're okay, Aaron is our resident expert on enmeshed women. And Aaron, if you're okay, can I defer to you to talk about that a bit? Is that a no? I can't. Aaron's going to be doing, when's Aaron's webinar? Alex, do you remember?
Let's see. Hers is, I think we are doing the women's enmeshment. Aaron will be hosting it January 12th. So that one will also be on the partner and spouse relationship as well.
Can we, Alex, can we save those questions for then? Because I would hate to wade into this and be firing from the hip. Women in enmeshment is not that's not my pocket of expertise. So I'd hate to speak out of class on that.
Okay, and then another good question was, is codependence the same as enmeshment, and are all enmeshed parents narcissists?
Those are really good questions. Codependency is not the same as enmeshment. Codependency is a tricky term clinically because it does not have it's been a little bit of a sticky thing to really study and look at because it doesn't have an operational definition. This is one of the reasons why you won't see the term codependency come up in relationship research. That's not to say that it's a dynamic that doesn't exist. It's one of those aspects of human relationships that's kind of it's ethereal. It's really hard to grasp. So codependency more describes one-way dynamics in relationships. Enmeshment, if we look at the stark research term enmeshment, it actually just describes closeness. It doesn't describe anything problematic. Enmesh means super close. Distant or distancing is not close. We're really looking at in enmeshment, the key mechanism is there's not allowance for differentiation. In codependency, there can be differentiation. There can be this recognition of you and I are not the same person. We're not on the same track, but I owe it to you to take care of you, or you owe me something. In enmeshment, it's really I lose my identity if you're no longer my special boy, or I lose my identity if I'm no longer the golden child in the family. And then the second part of that, are all enmeshed parents narcissists? Clinically, probably not. All of us possess some narcissistic tendencies. In fact, the work of Craig Cashwell, he wrote Rethinking Narcissism. He actually puts narcissism on a spectrum. He calls it unhealthy narcissism on this extreme. There's egoism on this extreme, which is kind of absence of a personhood, absence of identity. And in the middle, he puts narcissism. The ability to look out for ourselves, think highly of ourselves, reference ourselves first, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem becomes when you can't put that in context. There's a lot of reasons why a parent would override a child's needs in favor of their own, which is what happens in enmeshed relationships that aren't because there's clinically diagnosable narcissism going on. There are a lot of enmeshing parents who are narcissists. Some enmeshment, however, it can come out of very understandable situations. Maybe you have a terminally ill parent who requires a lot of care and attention, and it's more work than one parent can do. That can create those guilt and obligation dynamics simply because that's what it took for the family to survive. You can see the same enmeshment dynamics, and there can be very little of the cruelty that's there when you have a more narcissistic parent. You can get enmeshment dynamics that are really common in single parent families. Again, you have a parent all by themselves doing the job that old adage, it takes a village to raise a child, doing a job that takes a lot of people to do well all by themselves. I work with a guy right now who he doesn't identify with the enmeshment narrative. His mom was a single mother school teacher, and there wasn't a lot of money or resource to go around, and he stepped up and did what was needed to do to keep the family afloat. His mom's not a narcissistic person, so it happens commonly that there can be some more pronounced narcissistic traits, and certainly some enmeshing parents are more cruel than others, but not in all cases.
Okay, and then our next question, we have a partner whose husband is enmeshed, and they idealize their enmeshed parents' life and upbringing, and they're wondering, can they ever heal without grappling this?
So the only, metaphorically speaking, the only kind mother is reality. And it's hard. There are so many aspects to breaking free from enmeshment, and one is maturing. In immaturity, our brains literally can better handle the positive and negative aspects of a person at the same time. I could geek out on the neuroscience of that, but I'll hold off on that. But the ability to recognize that there are no angels and there are no demons. No mother is just a saint. No father is just a monster. We have to work a lot with the guys that we're working with. I can't put it any other way. There's some growing up, there's some maturing to do. Just because your parent did some things either knowingly or unknowingly that hurt you, it doesn't mean they're awful people. It doesn't mean you came from a bad family. It's grappling with the reality that the way you are now and the way you feel about relationships now, it came from somewhere. And it didn't come from the playground at school. Your formative years were spent with your primary caretakers, or primary caretaker, which for most of us is our mothers. And, as far as my view goes, I wouldn't expect any parent to be perfect at what they do. Those of you who are parents, I hope you don't think you're perfect at what you do in parenting. If you do, you need a reality check, because by the nature of the job, and you really don't know who you're parenting. You make mistakes all the time. And a lot of the enmeshed men that I work with, they'll avoid that side of this wasn't good, or this didn't help me. Or this really hurt me. They'll avoid that because there's anger that comes along with that recognition. And 9 times out of 10, the enmeshed guys that I work with, they really struggle with feeling allowed to be angry. That was one of the emotions that was kept off the scene in the family. And it's important for him to grapple with that. It can be very, very uncomfortable, especially if the way you've coped with that anger is to have an idealistic view of your parents or your family. But some good individual work around the reality of, hey, there were ups and downs. There were things that were really good for you from childhood and things that weren't so great. Dealing with that realistically it's a prerequisite for healing. It's like the 12 steps. It's step 1. Recognizing there's a problem, recognizing there's powerlessness, recognizing something happened. All is not well.
And then I am seeing a couple questions about just starting the journey of creating those boundaries, and what kind of questions they can ask themselves as the enmeshed child, and how they can kind of confront their enmeshed parent to get the boundaries in a healthy place.
Ooh, good question. So I'll start with what my take on what the fundamental nature of boundaries are. A true boundary is something that never actually needs to be negotiated with another person. And I say that because a true boundary, once you set it, whether or not you have the other person's cooperation or not, you will enforce what needs to happen. If, for example, you have an enmeshing parent who calls you 15 times a day, and your boundary is, I can't do 15 calls a day. That's too stressful for me. That's inappropriate. I'm not going to do it. You could talk to that parent and say, you get 1 call a week. Anything above that, I won't be answering. And if that parent continues to call, you can block the number. You don't get this privilege anymore. You can change your phone number. You can't contact me anymore. I'll contact you. Notice how in order for that boundary to succeed, you're not needing the parent or the other party to buy in, because you know what needs to happen, and you'll make it happen. So some questions to ask, I would say, first of all, look for where guilt and obligation are for you, and look at what it would take for you to uncouple from the guilt and obligation. I work with a man right now that one of his internal boundaries is, I won't feel bad about saying no. That's part of his uncoupling from the guilt and obligation. That's totally internal work. It's a very important boundary for him, and he has to work hard at it. He'll say no and then usually be racked with torment and want to go back and forth. But when he holds that line, I won't feel bad for this, he usually ends up being able to stick to his guns and ride out that initial discomfort. I think another question to ask is, am I setting this boundary to get a specific reaction from the other person, or am I setting this boundary because it's getting me what I need? Again, boundaries that get a specific reaction, whether it's compliance, hurt, recognition, again, that's not a boundary. Boundaries are about protecting your space, corralling your behavior so that you can live in integrity, be proud of what you're doing. And then when it comes to talking to a parent, I would make sure that you have done your homework, you've done the internal work you need to do, because most of the time when the enmeshed guys that I work with confront a parent, there's some blowback, there's some guilt, there's some remorse. So make sure you've done your internal work and you know how to hold the line. And then when you approach that conversation with a parent, it's a declaration, not a negotiation. You get one phone call a week, not, I would like it if you called me once a week only. Are you okay with that? Notice the difference. One is full of ambivalence. It's not claiming what you need, what you want. The other is, I'm the master of my castle. I know what's good for me, and I'm telling you, this is what's good for me. You can play ball or not. So that's the quick and dirty setting boundaries. I'm sure there's more I could say there, but I'll stop there.
And then I do have a question. As a partner, what can I do if my husband is not independent or ready to set those boundaries?
So when he's married to mom, I think it's chapter 8, that's written to partners of enmeshed men. There's a lot of really good guidance in there. Your safety and your sanity does not need to wait for your enmeshed partner to do what's needed. You can set boundaries with a family that are independent from his boundaries with a family. So for example, if part of that obligation is we have Thanksgiving coming up, if part of that obligation is everybody goes to the family gathering and everybody's happy, that's not a good place for you to be. If you're going to leave angry and resentful or hurt, you can say, I'm not going to your family stuff. I'm not okay with that. If it's a toxic place for the children, you can bring up, I don't think this is good for our kids either. And we need to work out a plan for what's going to happen with the kids. You can set your individual boundaries. You just can't dictate what he must do with his family. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There have been many enmeshed guys that I work with who have been helped greatly in their recovery by a partner who has decided that they're not going to wait forever for him to work it out. Giving him a little pain, a little anxiety from the distance that you're willing to tolerate, because you're taking seriously what you need. I hate to say it this way because it sounds sadistic, but I found few things that focus and motivate people like pain does. And in marriages where enmeshment is a problem, pain abounds. You don't have to make up, things to hurt each other with or things to be in pain about. It's there. So one of the potentially helpful things you can do is let your partner feel the pain from their ambivalence and from their continuation in a relationship that hurts you. Again, like I said earlier, it often gets a little bit rougher before it gets a little bit better. But again, we're trying to deal with reality here, not quick fixes. I hope that answers the question.
And then I have a question from somebody who said that they were raised by a sociopathic narcissist, and there was a fair amount of neglect, and now they are recognizing that pattern within themselves and how they're treating their wives. So they're curious how that would happen if they hated that so much when they were treated that way, and now it's becoming a cycle for their behavior.
Yeah, keep in mind that neurologically, things like closeness, touch, it actually doesn't come supernatural for us. I mentioned earlier, I have a 5-month-old daughter, so I've been seeing this, from beginning of life forward type thing. I was so looking forward to a little, cuddly blob that would just stay by me all the time. And she did when she was an infant, and she slept 21 hours a day. It's because she didn't have a choice. She's a little more mobile now. Things like touch and closeness, I can definitely see where there's times, like I see her do it with the dogs. They're going to be best friends, but right now, when they get in her space and her face, she backs up a little bit. The smells are intense, the touch is intense. It's not the most natural thing in the world for us to want to be close. We have to develop a taste. I wouldn't say a taste for that. We have to develop the ability to feel that that's safe and desirable. And in neglect, closeness is not safe. It's not desirable. So it's not like this, oh, I love closeness. That's not latent in any one of us. It is all based on experience. And I'll often see with people who didn't get touch, who didn't get proximity, who didn't get comfort, they have a really hard time with it in adulthood. They'll actually reject it. They'll move away from it. I was talking with my men's group the other night. We were talking about the challenges of working a recovery program. And one guy said, I can do the recovery stuff that punches me in the face over and over again. It's the comforting stuff that I can't stand. It's the comforting stuff that is more challenging for me. The calling a sponsor and having them pick up the phone and care about me on the other end. That's a big reason why I don't make the call. That's so uncomfortable for me. There's a lot of good reasons why that doesn't just come naturally. But you didn't have to just get it in childhood to develop a taste for it, to get comfortable. You can continue to work on that. So know what your thresholds are, know what your boundaries are, and don't try to blow yourself out of it. That'll create a rebound effect to where you don't want to approach again. Take it slow and steady and methodical, and just work on it piece by piece. It can definitely heal.
And the next question we have, why does shame accumulate in mother enmeshment, causing anger and difficulty with empathy with their partners especially?
So shame at the core of it is how do I say this? Your existence is on the line. If you look at how shame is manifest in the body, for most people, the reaction is a relaxing of these back neck muscles. So there's a drop in gaze, and there's a flood of blood from the gut up to the brain, which makes thinking hard. It's a complete social disconnector. So the feeling of shame itself can lead to social disconnection. Social disconnection can also lead to shame. It's this, do you really see me? Am I really important? If there's a kid who's constantly going to, mother and saying, I really want to go spend time with friends, and mom is saying, no, you've got to stay here. I need you here. You've got to do this thing for me. Or, who's going to take care of me? There's no recognition of that kid. There's a lack of personhood, a lack of recognition there. And shame comes out of that. There can also be, like in many enmeshed relationships, Dr. Adams refers to it as covert incest. There can even be overt incest. Lines can be crossed that there's a fundamental knowing, an inborn awareness is this shouldn't have happened. This was not a good thing. And little kids don't differentiate between what happened to me and who I am. It's all the same thing. So when there's that kind of trespass early on, the feeling of badness is not focused on the behavior. It's focused on me as the individual. I feel bad. I am bad. I made somebody else feel bad. I'm bad. I hope that helps to clarify a little bit.
And then how do you know when it is the right time to cut an enmeshed parent out 100%?
Oh, I would say when it's clear that they're not going to play ball in any way, shape, or form. Again, it's not a negotiation. It's not are you okay with me separating? It's you set the boundaries, you follow through, And actually, anecdotally, I'll say what Dr. Adams and I have seen is a lot of parents will get it. They'll start to accommodate. They'll stop some things. I've got a guy I'm working with right now who, they had a hard and fast cut because things have really gotten out of control and dangerous and toxic. He and his wife talk constantly about what do we want from extended family and what role do we want that to play. Holidays are coming up and they're looking at kids building memories with cousins, and they've actually reapproached the family and they've said, if there's family stuff going on these holidays, we might be interested in coming if we can have some boundaries respected. So when I look at severing any relationship stuff is not permanent. There may be a time where I got to go 100% no contact. This isn't going to work out. That doesn't mean that your heart is going to not return, or you're not going to want something in that relationship later on. And that's not necessarily a weakening. Again, as long as that position is, I'm not coming from guilt or obligation. I'm coming from what I want. I'm coming from what I can do. Like with this client I'm thinking of, on occasion, he'll check to see who's ready to play ball, who's ready to respect his personhood, the sovereignty of his family. And on occasion, he'll get some siblings who will, they'll participate in a healthy interaction and it feels good. And then other times they can't do it. So I would say when it's clear that the harm and the toxicity and the intrusion, especially if the intrusion is going to continue, you also have to look at what you have the ability to handle. Everybody has a different bandwidth. Some people can deal with a whiny parent simply by saying, we're changing the subject, or I'm leaving, we're not doing that. Some people have no tolerance for that. And you've really got to decide what you have the bandwidth for. And if you're consistently taking on things that are more than you can really handle, it's time to cut back.
And one question we have, do you consider enmeshment a form of neglect?
Yeah, because it is an overlooking, it is a misappraisal of the child's need. It's a focus on the parent's need. Again, whether that's intentional or not, or conscious or not, it doesn't matter. Kids have developmental needs, again, that aren't apparent. It's amazing to me that when somebody buys a new lawnmower or a household appliance, you'll check in with the owner's manual to a degree. We have so much that is written on child development and what kids need. But how many of us have read a lot of that? How many of us have looked at potential owner's manuals for our kids? Again, things that make a relationship good are not, they're not intuitive. We have to learn about it. We have to learn how to do it. So I would agree that it's a form of neglect where there's not a consideration that this isn't just a tiny adult. This is a child with unique needs that I'm not just going to intuitively understand all of it. Because number one, it's been a long time since I was a child. And number two, how do I put this? Kids just don't make sense. There's a lot of decoding to go on, and it takes a lot of attunement, which I would say parents owe that to their kids 100%, especially in the early years. As time goes on and that kid gets more capable, part of the parent's job, I love this viewpoint that I got this from Stan Tatkin. He writes a lot on marriage therapy. He said, part of the parent's job as the kids get more independent is to return to their love affair with each other and send the message to their kids, time for you to move on. We're doing our thing now. We've raised you, we've given you what you need. You can hang around, as much as you want or as much as you need, but this isn't on your terms anymore. This is on our terms. See, there's a switch there. If you do that too early with a kid, it's definitely neglect. If you don't do that with a kid, or you don't, signal to the kid, time for you to grow a little more, time for you to be independent, that's neglect too. It's a constantly moving target. That's why parenting's so hard.
And can you also speak on the connection between sex and porn addiction and enmeshment?
Yeah. So I talked about this a little bit before. One of the solutions to ambivalence and guilt and obligation is a secret life. In the affairs, the pornography or sex addiction, that can be a place where the anger gets to go, where it's not acceptable in the overt relationship. It can be a place where I feel like I've got my own life, I'm in control because this is secret, nobody knows about this. Enmeshed folks have a really hard time going through the front door in owning themselves, their sexuality, their wants and desires. So it's not uncommon for them to find their connection with that in something that's secret or compulsive.
What would be the process for somebody who has an addiction and also enmeshed to kind of get over both?
Yeah, really, really good question. As in most things in addiction recovery, you have to work on a lot of things simultaneously. I will say long-term sobriety is really hard for an enmeshed guy because he doesn't, generally on a deep sense, he doesn't feel ownership for his body. And that's a real important place where, in my experience, long-term sobriety comes from. It's not that, I'm staying sober because I believe that acting out addictively is morally bad or wrong. It's because I know what's good and what's not so good for me. There's a relationship with the body. And if the body, has always belonged to mom or dad or family, this is who you are, this is what you'll do, don't break your mother's heart. He's always going to have that conflict. Instead of using his body as an instrument for furthering his own life, he can use it as an instrument for revenge. He can use it as an instrument to enact the ambivalence, the secrecy. So while it's important to work on them at the same time, if there is enmeshment in the picture and addiction, you can't put off the enmeshment piece until the addiction is under control. Because it likely isn't going to get under control for long periods of time without addressing the enmeshment piece as well.
I do have a question that I'm not sure how we can answer with the individual experience, but we have somebody who is in a family business and they're wondering how to create proper boundaries within a family business.
So, that depends on whether or not you're planning to stay in the business or not. This gets really, really tricky. I'd say this is probably some of the most complicated enmeshment dynamics that we work with. If you're planning on leaving the business, that's a pretty straightforward setup. It's hard to take crap when you're in a position of strength. So that may mean, squirreling away some money so that when you do say goodbye to the family business, you're not going to be in poverty and be freaking out, because most people, when they're under a lot of stress, they'll do things that don't serve them well long term. If you're going to be in the family business, the principle is similar in dealing with a difficult coworker. You have to put issues on the table, and you have to draw attention to when the business of the relationships is interfering with the business of the business. Define your role, make your commitments, stick to your commitments, no more, no less. And again, always be looking at what you can really handle. It's a human tendency to do what works for us in the short term at the cost of doing better in the long term. So always keep an eye on that trade-off. The family business may be convenient because you get pay and position that you may not get in the regular world, but there's also stress that comes with it. So you have to constantly be asking, is the trade-off still worth it? Am I really caring for myself in the way that I need to be able to handle these stressors? Like I said, that's so complicated. That's probably all I can say about it today.
And we are coming towards the end of the webinar. Do you have any closing remarks that you would like to say?
Yeah, this is a big and ever fascinating, ever heartbreaking topic. I'm really, really glad that we started doing these. There will be some great webinars coming up. I think Amanda's doing our webinar next month. Was it Ken was going to be again?
December 8th with Amanda
Yeah.
on the impact of enmeshment on relationships.
Yeah, there is more and more help available out there and resources out there, and we're at Overcoming Enmeshment, we're working overtime to make sure that this is available to people who need it. So don't get overwhelmed by the size of the mountain. We have lots of good enmeshment sensitive therapists, more and more added every year to our list around the country. Get some good help, because it is possible to be breaking free. Like many of you are familiar with addiction recovery. It's a lifelong process. It's a practice, not a destination. But one of my favorite parts of this work, one of the things that brings me back to it again and again, is I love seeing people break free from the guilt and the obligation and embrace their life. It happens often. It's very possible. So reach out if you are in need of help. We have some good workshops coming up. We have good resources and more all the time. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, everyone. And I will send out a notification for the next webinar as well.
Great. Bye.